having published a book during the pandemic itself is an achievement, because the publishing industry really slowed down. All publishing came to a standstill, and the
Yeah, yeah,
fact that
yeah.
you actually got action from Penguin during the pandemic is because this is actually a 2020 book, right?
This is a 2020 book, but Penguin had been pursuing me since 2014, right? And I was the quintessential annoying, overconfident tech bro in 2014,
Okay.
right? And I was like, yeah, publishing is dead. Who the hell will? I mean, that was the peak of inflated expectations of social media and digital and the
Right.
next generation of the web. And that,
Right.
I was like, when I could just write my content, make my own iPad app, and then sell it for, whatever, $5 per app to everyone. Why would I go to a publishing company and settle for some
Yeah,
piddly
fuddy duddy.
7.5
Yeah,
to
yeah.
10%
Old world.
royalty and all of that sort of stuff, right? Why go for debt free when I could go completely digital and so all that? But I think, and so I kept saying no, but I ended up never getting down to actually doing what I said, what I thought I might do. Um, because again, that world also never really panned in the way that we expected it would, right? I
Yeah, yeah,
mean,
of
in the
course.
sense that, of course, what eventually ended up happening was that short form video and to some degree, obviously, long form video on YouTube is
Mm-hmm.
really what took off. Right? As any kind of formal career for anybody who's creative into content and so on. Other than that, I don't think there's, actual writers never managed to make serious amount of money self-publishing on Kindle or doing any of those kinds of things at all,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So in that sense, I think it was interesting to watch as I got more mature and I got a deeper understanding beyond the initial irrational exuberance around technology and so on. And I think obviously 2016, the rise of social media, the impact of social media on political discourse around the world, the polarization, the fake news, all the rest of the stuff that eventually then happened, uh, got to the point where I actually deleted my Instagram account so that's most people don't know. I deleted my Instagram account in like 2016. I said,
Oh,
what, that's
wow.
enough. I'm just going to keep to Twitter because I grew up with it for a while. So I'm just going to stick to that. No Facebook, no, nothing from, that company and so on. And then when I ended up writing this book, and by that point of time, I had also kind of switched away from reading more on screens to reading on paper, because I literally realized that I was remembering more things that I read on paper than I read on a screen, right? And then there's obviously now science that says that, well, you
Sure.
actually do retain, because there's something about additional muscle memory built by the tactile feel of the paper and you turning pages, and the
Right.
muscle memory of remembering how it was folded when you saw something really fascinating, the folds of the book, all of that add to your richness of the memory of reading a great book, which you do
Mm.
not have on a Kindle or an iPad. And so I was at that point of time, I was like grudgingly, yeah, I think there is something to mankind's oldest form of knowledge management, which is the book.
Yeah.
That is probably going to survive, right? All of these digital stuff, probably not, but books will probably be around. So in that sense, I think that was so. I was in right place at the right time for. Yeah, I was starting to respect books again, and then Penguin said, "Yeah, why don't you write a book?" And then I eventually said, "Okay, fine. Now I have the time. I will write this book."
Okay, great. So how long did it take you to actually write? I know that, it's sort of like all your social media work and everything was probably a
Yeah.
build up.
Yes.
You had it on
Yes.
here. But how
Yes.
long did it take for you to actually write the book?
See, I sometimes I think, and I sometimes warn people ahead of time, saying that one of the advantages of being a software person, and again, one of the advantages of being a very good software person, is that you have certain methodical knowledge management and productivity hacks where you're able to externalize a lot of your thinking, note taking, connection forming to technology in ways that most other people are not able to, right? Unless they were like extraordinarily brilliant and are able to keep all of this in their heads, right? I think it is my use of. So one of the things I'd actually done is that every time I would cook, I would take down notes
Okay.
of, essentially, hey, by the way, today I made chapati and I used 80% hydration, right? Water to flour, and
Okay.
it turned out to be like okay, pretty perfect, right? And I used 110%. It was like a complete sticky mess, right? And so I had so every time a dish worked well or did not work well, I essentially had notes.
I
Right?
can see a lot of the participants are
Yeah.
smiling at this. Like,
Yes.
okay, you
So
measure how much hydration.
yeah. So I sort of I had these notes, and so in that sense, actually, it took me from when I signed the contract with Penguin 6 weeks to submit the draft of
Oh my
65,000.
God, that's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah, I know that's why I said it's kind of sounds ridiculous, but to be honest, if I it was had to do with the fact that I was exceedingly familiar with the subject, and in a sense, the challenge was actually determining the table of contents and the flow of the book and how the ideas would flow from one another, but not really just the. So what I ended up doing is that I actually spent more time writing down a flow of how this whole thing was going to go logically, right? So I said, look, in my mind, the book has to flow, right? What would an absolute beginner want to learn right up front, right? And it has to sort of represent India as such. So the very first thing is, how do you cook rice? Then how do you cook chapati, and how do you cook dal? These are the three most important things that Indians cook. And then, how do you make like eggs, or how do you cook meat? How do you cook vegetables? So it sort of kind of carries that sequence, and then you kind of get into actual cooking techniques and boiling and steaming and frying and all of that, and then into adding spices, and then about more advanced things, how brown stuff, why is browning of an onion so important, advanced techniques eventually. And then Indians seem to be afraid of like microwave, use of MSG, the use of air fryers, and all those kinds of things, eventually leading to the sort of more provocative idea that that I think people should not cook, that none of our best cooks in the family is usually grandmothers and mothers. None of them use recipes. They use heuristics. And my thought process was that there's a difference between a recipe and a heuristic. A heuristic is an algorithm, and it's a broad set of principles that you follow, and then you can swap out ingredients, you can swap out cooking techniques, and so on. But a dal is not a recipe. A dal is a heuristic, right? Yeah.
Right. Some people are saying your voice is breaking. I don't know if you can do much about it. Is there another connection you might be able to use?
No. Sometimes what happens is that no, probably when I shake my head too much, then the video also kind of. Is this better now? I'll try and be a little bit. Yes.
Yeah. So we need you to stay still, if that works.
Yes, that's okay.
Yeah, because
so essentially, I think
sorry, I'm going to jump in 1 minute.
Yes.
So there was also a question saying the moment you said 6 weeks, the question was, how many words was your book?
65,000 words.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was again. So I used a tool called Scrivener.
Yeah.
So as I said, I spent a lot of time thinking about the table of contents on the section and the flow, because I think see people the foundation idea of telling a good story is the connections between things, not the things themselves. The more time you spend on those connections, then you can fill in the blanks with the things, with the scenes, with the facts, right? If it's nonfiction, it's facts. If it's fiction, it's the individual scenes and so on, right? It's the connections that really matter. And I think if you, and that's fundamentally what I spent most of the time on. Once I had the individual sections, I had it down to, well, these are anywhere between 500 words to 3,000 words per section, right? And at that point of time, it's really just, I set a daily target of 3,000 words to just get them done.
I mean, listening to you, I'm thinking you must have had like a project plan for this thing, right? MPP file apne banai hogi.
No, I did not use. So I, as I said, no, I don't use any of those traditional corporate tools. I use completely different, more open source, more free-form ways of using these. So I use a tool called Scrivener, which is actually, by the way, used by a lot of like authors. By the way,
right? You know Scrivener very well. We're a group of writers, so
right here, obviously, right. And again, it's one of those fancy things only available on Mac type of tool, right? Not for
it's
those.
on PC also.
Oh, now it is? Okay. So earlier, when I used it, it was Mac only, right? It was not for the plebs, if you will, right? So now probably, I guess, yeah, they do have it. So I use Scrivener, and it allows you to set like a daily target. And as I'm typing it, that countdown comes down, right? And so I know that I'm kind of done for the day. I just woke up every day at 6 a.m., wrote for 2 hours, and that was it. And the point is that I think, so what helps is the fact that I was never going to get stuck with writer's block writing any of these 500 to 3,000 word sections, because I really had all of the information at my fingertips, as well as in all of the research that I'd kind of done. So that's why I think the planning, the laying out of the table of contents and the sections really helped.
Help you speed up the writing of the book.
Yeah, speed up the writing of the book.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So I've spent some time with this book. I want to show it to you guys. This is what it looks like, Masala Lab. And, it's very interesting. I think you're a very smart man, because I think while the book is about cooking and you are at the center of it, the queen of the book is your wife, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes.
That's very clear to anybody who reads the book. Like, I'll read the last line. It closes tools I used, talks about instant thermometer. It talks about the microwave timer.
Yes.
And then it says, my wife's distinctly superior sense of aroma and taste. Research tells us that on an average, women have a keener sense of taste and smell, getting neutral feedback on the balance of heat, sourness, saltiness, and sweetness. In addition to aroma, it is critical to improving one's skill, right?
Oh yeah.
When you turn the page, the first thing is references, and after that you come to acknowledgements. And acknowledgements opens again with, I have to start by thanking my wonderful wife, Smita, who has the fantastic palate that can detect way more aromas and tastes than mine.
Yeah.
Who serves as a general arbiter for most of my kitchen experiments, right?
Yes.
So must hand it to you. I think wisdom is.
No, I think it's it was also biological, right? I mean, as part of research for this book, there are a bunch of these papers that I read that basically says that women have like a 30% more density of taste buds and 30% more olfactory receptors. And they're also, they have a higher density of cones in their eyes that allows them to distinguish between shades of colors more finely, right?
Oh, nice.
I like, for example, I know blue, right? My wife will say all manner of words that I don't recognize, lilac and mauve and indigo,
cyan,
and all those kinds of things. Yes.
But
so it's just that I think a big part of this was also, I wanted to make sure that the tone of the book should not come across as this insufferable tech bro lecturing people about how to cook using science, right? When in reality, and when I was reading, I think one of the books I'd read for this was Harold McGee's this magisterial 1,000-page on food and cooking, right? And in fact, in his opening thing, he says that in the kitchen, the only knowledge that matters is knowing how to cook, not the knowledge of science. And I think that really sort of stayed with me, saying that, look, most people can cook the most astonishingly amazing food without knowing anything about biochemistry and Maillard reactions and pH levels and concentrations and all of that, right? So it is something that human beings have been doing for like 40,000 years, ever since we invented cooking. And I think science at best is just a more efficient language for communicating that wisdom without ambiguity to the next generation, rather than it being some sort of the final word on how to cook.
Right. So, so you also talked about food labs. I heard your other, I was hearing your other podcast with Ravi Verma and the scene in the Amit Verma and the scene and the unseen. And one of the things that you said is that you want to keep your book within the 300-page limit.
Yes. Why 250 pages. Yes.
Yeah. So this is actually 256 pages, but I think in that you had mentioned that you want to keep it within a certain size. Yeah. Because I think Food Lab is like 700 pages, right?
Yeah. So I think the American market is very different. It's a much more mature reading market. And India is very different. And I think this kind of comes, to be honest, it actually comes from the publishers themselves.
Oh, okay.
So my editor was basically like, okay, if you're targeting, so one is obviously, I think if they generally have a sense for how well this book will do, right? And if they have a sense that, it's going to be, it could be hit or miss and so on, they'll usually a little bit less, they don't really care much about the length. I mean, as long as it's not like some scary thing that significantly adds to cost, they don't particularly care, right? But they're like, if they believe that they're going to put a lot of marketing muscle, and I think this could perhaps do well, the sales wisdom seems to be that you got to keep it under 250 to 300 pages, because it's the size that people will pick up a book in the airport bookstore. Now, this is interesting, and this has obviously changed over time. But at that point of time in 2020, pre-pandemic, a surprisingly large percentage of English fiction, non-fiction kind of book sales happened in airport bookstores.
Yeah.
Okay. And obviously then the pandemic happened and entirely switched to Amazon and Flipkart.
Yeah.
But surprisingly, I think so. It also goes to say that the people who are reading any kind of other than I would say about 10 authors in the Sudha Murthy, Chetan Bhagat, Abish category, right?
Yeah.
Every other book is being read by 1% of the audience of India. That's your target audience, right? That's basically roughly about 10 million people.
Right.
And a disproportionate of that 10 million are flying. And they're mostly going through airports. So this is in a sense that, so if I have to pick this up at an airport bookstore, I'm not picking up a giant book, right? So there's there's a sense that this small paperback factor finish in a decent amount of time, and also hold in one hand conveniently. Apparently, that's another yes.
Okay, that's interesting. So I also wanted to talk a lot about AI, and I wanted to talk about social media, but I think we have only so much time. So we have something called rapid fire round. But before that, I want to ask you one question, which is, you're coming to the retreat in December. You're going to be running a course from the 21st to the 25th. What do you want to, is that for writers? Because we have writers here. Is that for writers, or who are you thinking about as who will benefit from that course? What are you going to do there?
I think any creative person will benefit from that course, not necessarily writers, anyone who wants to actually sustain a creative hobby, content creation hobby of any kind. Could be writing, could be making YouTube channels, could be writing a blog, could be anything. Maybe just becoming a thought leader on LinkedIn. Doesn't really matter, right? And I think because this is something that I've kind of felt that I have over the last 10 or 15 years built a set of habits that, as I said, basically the kind of habits that allow me to write a 65,000 page book in like 6 weeks, right? I know somebody was asking me when is the next book coming out. It's just that I'm doing so many things parallelly that Penguin has been on my case. But yeah, I am writing 2 more books.
And is that going to be the sci-fi or the food?
No, so once, because Masala Lab has been so successful, they're not letting me do anything else. So it's going to be food only. Yeah.
Okay.
So but I think it's a rich enough subject, and so I had some. Even when I wrote Masala Lab, I had a sense of if I write a sequel and a prequel, what would that be like? So like a good software engineer, I'd kind of plan ahead. So, but yes, so it's basically it will still be on foot, but again, really deal with different areas. But all 3 books will eventually kind of flow together in a sense, right? Like a trilogy, if you will. So that's the thought process.
And you said that the workshop will be for anybody who's working on something creative, some sort of content.
Yes, the workshop is for anything creative, and I felt that I think we are at a unique inflection point where, unlike before, where you had to be like this nerdy technical software person to be productive with technology, we are now at a point where the creative use of AI and software and technology in general can make people 10 times more productive and more creative, right?
Without knowing code.
Without knowing how to code, right? And in a sense, it's about building a new set of human plus AI habits that retain your central creative identity while outsourcing the more mundane aspects of the stuff that's really not worth your time, right? And that I think is I'm really excited about sort of taking people through that process and all of the tools and the frameworks. And in a sense, well, hopefully at the end of it, maybe some of the people who take that course can then go ahead and write a 65,000 page book in 6 weeks, or maybe start a very successful YouTube page or a Substack or anything that they wanted to do.
I know I have my social media people coming in and attending your course, so that's already happening. All right. So before we open out to all the questions in the Q&A, I have a couple of questions which are supposed to be a rapid fire round. Okay. So just you have to answer instinctively. So the first thing you said was Masala Lab was hugely successful. Can you tell us how much it sold? How many copies, roughly?
So first and foremost, I think it's important for people. I'm sure you guys
this is a rapid fire round. Okay. So it's an objective type question.
It sold 100,000 copies.
Oh my God. That's ridiculous. Wow. Okay. Many,
That's what
many
I'm saying. I
congratulations.
thought actually, no, in the sense that I think, given that in the West, books tend to sell in the billions, but India,
Yeah,
people have to remember that 3,000 is break even and
yeah,
10,000
yeah.
is
And
bestseller.
10,000 is bestseller. So 100,000 is like 10x
Yeah, yeah,
bestseller. Fantastic.
yeah, yeah,
Next
yeah, yeah.
question.
Yes,
Do you
yes.
think AI will kill us all? Yes, no.
No, I don't think so. I have
Okay.
been working in AI.
Okay.
It will for sure eliminate a lot of jobs, low end
Ah,
jobs.
ah.
Uh, and I think human beings without jobs, unemployed men are more likely to kill us than AI. Yeah.
Okay. That's a fair answer. All right. Um, so I'm going to move to the chat, and the first question is, uh, your Spotify stuff is way different from your YouTube content on food. Psychedelic vibe. So it's more of a comment
Yeah.
than a
Yes.
question, but do you want to respond?
It's actually quite interesting in that in terms of my creative hobbies, in terms of net total amount of effort, I would have spent the most amount on music because I enjoyed doing it. Right. I enjoyed simply just the creative process. It
Right.
doesn't matter that it took me hours or days to make something. Uh, for ultimately, I think the very, very small and niche audience.
Right.
Right. Because I think music is a very different, everyone has unique
So,
and pop music is very different. And for me, I think it was a mix of being a multi-instrumentalist, having grown up with violin, learning cello, guitar, and then kind of doing this vanity project of saying, can I make music where I do everything, right? I mean, all play all the instruments, sing the songs, and also do the mixing and mastering, and so on. So that's what I was doing between 2014 and 2017. And then I obviously, I put out these two albums on Spotify and so on. So yeah, so it comes out of my original training in Carnatic classical music, but then obviously subsequently other genres of music as well.
right. Okay. Next question. There's a video of Krishan Aroma where he talks about your wife. That's more of an observation. He's much of a feminist. So I think you should take that as a compliment. I would. Next is
Yes.
uh, like 1 minute here. 1 minute. Okay. It says, how do you use tools, AI, etc., for book writing? So you already mentioned Scrivener. Was there anything else that you used?
No, pretty much at that point of time, it was mostly Scrivener. And I eventually, I think for subsequent, after I wrote the book, I discovered a tool called Craft, which is what I use now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a it's a very
It's spelled
it's a very
CRAFT.
CRAFT.
Okay.
Again, Mac only. Okay. Mac and iPhone only, right?
Okay. All
And
right.
it allows for very creative graph-based note taking, right? So basically, so half my Instagram reels are basically about I read something very interesting or I hear something interesting and I need to take it down because it's going to be part of a story that I tell. But when I capture something else later, maybe a week later, I need a very neat way by which I can connect that to something that I've already written. And Craft
Okay.
makes that simple. And I think
Nice.
it sort of allows you to think in connections as opposed to capturing concepts, right? So I think it's sort of that graph-based note taking thing.
Nice.
Yes.
Okay. And the tool you said is called Craft, CRAFT.
CRAFT. Yes.
Okay, great. Next question. This
I
is
do
more
use
like a
nowadays. I do use, like, for example, I do use Perplexity. I use Perplexity for fact checking and finding citations and all of that. So yeah, so that's the AI that I think I find most useful in the sense that it is designed to find citations rather than hallucinate its way to an answer.
yeah, correct. So for those of us who don't know what perplexity is, you want to summarize it? Like
Perplexity is
like
a
Ashok said,
yeah.
it's a
So it's
tool
like
of
Chat.
fact checking.
It's like
Yeah.
so it's a family of tools like ChatGPT, Anthropic, Claude, Google Gemini, and so on. Perplexity AI is a place where you can ask questions, and rather than the AI answer from its own trading, it will go out, search the internet, crawl, gather information, and then summarize all of that information as an answer. So it
With
generally gives you
citations.
both, yeah, with citations because it's there, and their secret sauce is what sources they pick, right? So they obviously
Hmm.
don't pick some random, blog spot of some guy and all that. They'll pick like more validated
Credible
sources and so on. Yeah,
sources. Right.
credible sources and so on. Yeah.
So it's getting more and more scary what AI can do for us. All right. Next question.
It's actually good. I don't think it should be scary. Right? We need more fact checking, not less.
Yeah. Uh, Ponu has a question. What are some of the books about cooking and food that you have enjoyed?
I think my favorite one, the most enjoyable one, has to be the books by Anthony Bourdain and also by Samir Nosrat, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. And obviously, On Food and Cooking is more academic, if you will. But again, you could always pick it up and learn something. For really the history of Indian food, the works of K.T. Acharya, right? I mean, it's spectacular how much research that man did, despite not being actually a historian or a food person, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and I think so. These are just some of the sources. I also like the writing of Lizzie Collingham and Colleen Taylorson, specifically on Indian food. Yes.
Excellent. This
Yeah.
one's a long question, but I think it's an important question and it's one that bothers a lot of people. So he says, "Hello, sir. As an indisciplined wannabe writer, I joined FDC. My sense of achievement as I reached my word count every day was palpable to everyone around me. But then someone pointed out that AI is going to take over creativity and story creators' job will be redundant. But this is what I want to be, a story creator and teller to an audience. I don't want to write for myself or tell stories to myself. Should I wake up to the fact that this profession is a mirage and find something else that I'd like to pursue?"
I think it's tricky. We are still in the very early days of AI. What I can tell you is that AI will eliminate mediocre content creation.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to write mediocre content, AI can do it better than you, right? I think that's the thing. I don't think AI will write exceptional content because I think the exceptionality of a story comes from human experiences, and by definition, these do not have human experiences. They can simulate it, but it's never going to be your voice, your tone, your right. Actually, interestingly enough, like by the way, as an AI person, I have trained an AI agent on 100 of my Instagram scripts. So as to save time so that I can, after doing my research, I'll give the 1,000-word research and say, now in my tone and voice, give me a 250-word reel script. And it's not great. It's okay. It sounds like me, but it still sounds fake. And I really think, see, if you're storytelling is something very central to human beings. And I think don't confuse mediocre content creation with truly good storytelling.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're at the start of your career, it can seem very bleak because I think a lot of entry-level jobs in content creation turn out to be jobs to churn out mediocre content.
Yeah.
Marketing content
SEO
and copy for SEO stuff and all of that.
Yeah.
So those jobs for sure they will not exist. So I think it's really about whether you are able to kind of tell a good enough story that can get the attention of people at a level where you kind of jump past this mediocrity phase. Is really what the challenge is going to be. Because I don't claim to have all the answers, but I think that's the tough answer, at least for anyone who is in this space.
Fair enough. And I want to just take another minute, but we were just at a workshop with Shekhar Kapoor. It ended today, and I've just driven back. And we had this deep conversation with him. And if you all know Shekhar, he's also a very big AI proponent, and he uses AI a lot. And he said exactly the same thing: is that AI will be able to describe fear, but it can't feel fear. It can describe a taste, it can describe a view, but it can't actually taste anything. It can't actually see that view. So a lot of the things that creativity comes and the desire to create. So humans inherently have a desire to create. AI does what you ask it to. So it doesn't have the desire to do anything. So this is something that I've heard repeatedly. There was this AI conference called Synapse, which happened in Delhi in February. Excellent conference.
Yes.
Everywhere, everyone you talk to, it's the same thing. Is that your AI is going to raise the bar, the mediocrity and crappy content is going to go out the door. But the truly exceptional, the truly human, like Krish Ashok's book, AI can't write that book because what you're doing is taking two very diverse fields and synthesizing them in with a very deep insight and understanding of a field. So it's not a rehash off of the internet. It's actually new information which has come from scratch, right? AI can't do that for you. So what you need to look at
it's got to be a rehash.
Yeah. So what AI will do will be a rehash. It will be a little soulless, and that's where it is at now. Now, in 5 years from now, where it's going to be, we don't know, but that's where it's at this moment in time. All right. Next question.
I think a good way, actually, I would just want to add this, right?
Sure.
See, a good way to truly, I think a lot of people kind of misunderstand what AI cannot do, right?
Yeah.
And they just think that I gave a prompt and it gave this fantastically grammatically accurate 2 paragraphs that is beautifully search engine optimized. And they're thinking, oh my God, is it going to replace us and so on? I think a good way to uh, try and ask all of the state of the art AIs to give you good metaphors and just see what happens, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And the thing is that that's where you will find that it can, at best, it can look into every book that it has ever read and rehash something that somebody else has already said, but it can never come up with an original metaphor. I'll give you an example, right? No AI can come up with something like this, right? So this is basically resentment is like drinking poison and then waiting for the other person to die. So this is Saint Augustine.
Wow, that is
right?
beautiful.
So this is Saint Augustine, right? At 12th or 13th century, right? And no AI could have originally come up with that. Because that is because it synthesizes so much human experience, so much human observation, and real life watching people, poison themselves with resentment and so on. That's really where that's the mask of human creativity, right? Being able to turn a good metaphor. Yeah.
That's a brilliant line. I'm writing it down. Thank you. Yeah, I agree with that. Even humor, I think mostly AI sucks at humor because again, it tends to be very human and it also tends to be very contextual.
Yes,
so,
and empathetic, right? It needs real-time empathy, right? A stand-up comic.
Absolutely.
It's the when you pause and all of that stuff that really makes the joke, right? Yeah.
All right, Sai has the next question. You're multi-talented and exceptional in all that you do. But how do you perceive time and how do you decide how to invest in each part of you? Genuine question, because I suffer from jumping between music, writing, cinema, and a workplace.
I don't think there is a method to this. See, I've also in the past, I think I've been sort of I would have just jumped to doing things that I enjoy doing at that moment, rather than doing what needed to be done based on a deadline and so on. We've all kind of done that, right? But I think it's best to not over-engineer. In my experience, I have tried every possible task management, this management, the reminder, all that sort of nonsense. For me, they do not work because it's that creativity doesn't work on a schedule. This is a clock or a schedule and so on, right? And so somehow I think it's like how even in food and nutrition as well, right? You can't actually fix your willpower and avoid eating that Diwali mithai that's in front of you, right? That's very hard to do. But what you can do is that you can place the box of cookies at a shelf that is so inaccessible that when you want it, it's not that easily available. So it's easier to change your environment than to change your willpower and so on. I think the same applies to creativity. You can't change the way your brain works when it comes to being creative, but you can create the right conditions for it in a way that's comfortable kind of for you, right? And so the way I think about it is to roughly follow sort of like these principles where, like, for example, for my fitness, I have this idea that on days that I do not do gym, I will not eat certain kinds of carbohydrates. It's sort of just become a habit, right? So it's like, oh, I did not do gym today. So it's like become closely associated with me not eating certain kinds of high calorie food. The other habit, for example, is the content creation to consumption ratio, right? So for me, writing 100 words is creation. Watching art film, art cinema is consumption.
Sure.
Right. So in a sense that I think you have to maintain a sane consumption creation ratio, right? So watching the finest movie is not the same thing as going and shooting, some video with your phone. That is still an act of creation. And so in that sense, I think the muscle that you use for creation is almost always a fundamentally different one than the one that you're using for consumption. And unfortunately, I think there was a point of time in the past when there was very finite amount of things you could consume. And so the great writers and everyone else just simply seem to have all the time to churn out some of the most amazing things, right? We are now in the sort of where the drug dealer ecosystem of consumption, where there's apps and things assaulting you with 5 second, 10 second, 30 second reels and short form content and binge-worthy TV series all the time. That it is there is this infinite amount of content. You've got to somehow just balance it, but still just do what you most enjoy doing. Right? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
Right. Okay, that's a great answer. Next, do you consider yourself an author who's also a social influencer, or do you think you're a social influencer who also writes books? Asking because many of us writers shun from social media for various reasons.
So the interesting thing is that the social media, the Instagram, YouTube social media fame came afterwards. It was at least this scale of influence was not there, right?
Okay.
I had a niche audience on Twitter for sure, right? And for my earlier blog and so on, but I couldn't be considered a influencer in the way I am today. And that kind of happened almost 2 years after I wrote the book, to be honest, right? In fact, the sale of the book, while it went, it then skyrocketed after I reached like some 500 million followers on Instagram and so on. Because then, even right now, most of the people who follow me on Instagram are like, "Oh, I didn't know you wrote a book."
Okay.
So they still keep discovering the fact that because the number of book readers is a tiny fraction of the number of people consuming short form content and so on.
Definitely.
So that's it. The second element is that I think the other thing is that I don't do commercial collaborations on Instagram because I have a job at TCS, and I don't want there to be a conflict of interest. And I find the Instagram collaboration ecosystem broadly unethical.
Right.
It's not a great system.
Right.
YouTube on the other hand is that there's some sort of passive AdSense revenue that comes from the videos that I put on. That's fine, right? But Instagram per se, I actually don't make any money from Instagram.
Right.
So that in that sense, I think influencer for sure. I guess in the sense that the news media will often call me when there is some story about food. They'll ask me to
I
comment.
saw that you were quoted in The Economist recently. That was so cool.
They keep quoting me for all kinds of things. The news media will call me for some provocative news segment, and they will pit me against some fearmonger who I would have debunked on social media, and then put us both together and see if there's a conflict going on. So I normally try and say no to those things, but having a large audience then comes with its own responsibilities, if you will.
I'm sure.
But I think I would still like to see myself as a science communicator, right? I think in the context of writing a book, yes. So therefore, I'm an author that is communicating science. But in the context of communicating science in 90-second videos, I'm a social influencer. Yes.
Right. That's a nice way to think about
it. Author and these things are channels rather than things by themselves, I feel.
And the next question actually ties in exactly to this. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Do you ever feel when making content for social media that you are wasting content that could go into a book or vice versa? How do you negotiate that?
See, the number of people who will read your book. For example, my videos get generally 1 to 2 billion views. Okay. Every single reel of mine gets 20 times more audience than the number of people who have bought my book.
Yeah.
So I think the scale of these things is just completely different. The audience is completely different. So in fact, I think it's best to not think of content as something that you have to preserve and not lose and so on, right? In some sense, I think knowledge is free, right? How you provoke that person's mind in your unique voice, that is yours.
Right.
Hiding knowledge and saying that I would rather put this in a book because this is just too good to be leaked to social media and so on, I think it's the wrong approach. Because I think a lot of this knowledge is incremental, right? It's from somewhere and you built it. It's not your own. I mean, it's humanity's collective knowledge that you are synthesizing and telling in a unique voice of yours. So don't bother with all of this. Should I wait to put in a book and so on? The people who will read your book are not the same people who will watch your reels and so on. And when they read a book, it's not as if they come across one isolated fact. Oh, but no, I already saw this video, so therefore I'm not going to read this book, right? There is more to a book, the investment of time that you do, than the kind of investment of cognitive effort in like a 60-second video.
Sure, great. 2 last questions. Can you? And this one, I'd request you to keep your answers as concise as possible because we also have to talk a little bit about the word count for all these guys. Can you really break out of the mold of writing something other than food now? After 100,000 copies sold, how are you looking at your writing journey? Is writing now about following the crumbs, or can you break out of the culinary genre and write something new? Maybe about music or even being a social media influencer?
Yeah, I suppose, I think, I mean, as I've grown older, I'm a little bit less confident about trying to have an opinion on everything, right? I used to be that person when I was in my early 30s. I had an opinion on everything on Twitter, right? I would comment on what was going on politics, on everything else. I'm a lot more reticent now than I was. So, for sure, yes, I think I could write about technology. I could write about music, and I could write about like the sort of computational creativity.
Right.
For sure, yes. But yeah, I mean, it has to sort of fit into the thousands of things that I'm doing at the same time. And I again, people keep asking me why I still have a day job. I have it because I enjoy doing it.
Right.
So let's see how that goes. Yes.
And so you're basically saying that you don't feel constrained that you have to only write food. You can write whatever you want. So that's
Obviously,
great.
yes, yes, yeah.
Excellent. All right. The other question, last question, you mentioned you have a lot of notes / information. What tips would you give us to organize the notes?
Don't waste your time trying to find the ideal tool to organize notes. Uh, it has to be searchable. You have to focus on ease of finding connections between things. That's all. If Excel works for you, use Excel. If just Notepad works for you, use Notepad. Don't overthink these things, because I think um, what is important is the muscle of collecting a lot of information and building the muscle to tell interesting stories that connect between unconnected things, right? Rather than worry about whether there is an ideal way to capture notes. All our brains are organized differently. The same tool will not work exactly the same way for everyone.
All right, great. Well, it's been fantastic speaking with you. Looking forward to meeting you in person in December. And thanks a lot, Krish.